My name is Aryeh Citron, and we are learning page Lamed Vav Amud Aleph in Sefer Vayikra, which is the mimer of והניף Omer in Parshas Emor. So the pasuk says concerning the Omer sacrifice, which was the first barley sacrifice of the year, the first grain sacrifice of the year, on the second day of Pesach, that והניף Omer, they should wave the Omer. The Alter Rebbe is going to explain what this means, spiritually speaking, in terms of Avodas Hashem, how it relates to Pesach, how it relates to the counting of the Omer, and how it relates to Shavuos. So we know that Omer is an amount of grain, of barley grain specifically, which is animal food. So to understand this, the Alter Rebbe says that there are two types of Malochim. Like we say in davening, Yotzim Meshorsim, VaAsher Meshorsov. Hashem creates Meshorsim, which are Malachim that serve him, VaAsher Meshorsov, that serve him. This is referring to two types of Malachim. One type are the Malachim that exist from the beginning of creation, from the Sheshis and Berashit. They last forever until the world will come to an end as we know it and go back to Tohu. These are the Malachim generally that have names, Michael and Gabriel and so on. They are the Chayas that carry the Merkava that Yecheskel spoke about and Yeshaya spoke about. And then there are the Malachim that are created every day, and they sing Shira to Hashem, and then they cease to exist. These Malachim are created by the Kedusha, the Nictzotzi of Kedusha, the sparks of holiness, that came into this world through the Shviras HaKelim of Noiga. They are found in Biyah, in the lower realms. They are the Noiga of Biyah, that is to say, the Klipas Noiga of Biyah, so it has Kedusha in it. The Kedusha comes from the Shviras HaKelim. When they are elevated in a manner of Mayim Nukvin, meaning to say they're elevated from below, each and every day from new, at that point, those malachim get included in their source. They sing, so to speak, meaning to say they bring their kedusha back to Hashem. And in that process, they experience a klos hanefesh. That kedusha experiences a yearning to go back to its source. They become included in their source, which is malchus, and then they cease to exist. This is similar to what it says in the Gemara, that Hashem put his little finger into the Malachim and burned them. It says in the Gemara that there were Malachim who did not want Hashem to create the world. And they said, Ma'enish kisas kerenu, vedanam kisas kedenu, who is man? Why should you bother creating him? What's the point? And Hashem didn't want to take their advice, so he burnt them with his little finger. And the explanation of that Gemara is well known. That what it means is that he gave them a little bit of extra revelation of godliness, more than they were used to having, and they were not able to handle that revelation, and therefore they burned, so to speak, and they went back to their source. Now, in that case, it was a punishment because they had spoken against the idea of creating the world, and Hashem did not like their protest, so to speak. But the same is true of the malachim that are created through the elevation of this world and the worlds of Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya in general. And they go back into their source, which is Malchus. And it's the intense revelation of Ein Sof, which is in Malchus, that comes to them, that causes them to cease to exist. This is also what it says in the Targum Unison on the pasuk Behemos Baharei Olef, pasuk in Tehillim. The the Targum Unison says on that pasuk, Elef turned Ochla Behema Rabbah, that these are the animals of 1,000 mountains that are eaten by the Behema Rabbah. Now, what is this Behema Rabbah? We know that Behema is the gematria of 52, and it is referring to the level that includes within itself all of the elevations of Noiga, of the klipa of nega, the unholiness that has kedusha within it. And that level is called Behema Rabbah. Why is it called Behema Rabbah, the great Behema? We know that in the realm of Bria, there are 12 cattle. These were represented by Shlomo HaMelech's 12 cattle that he had, in the Beis HaMikdash. First Beis HaMikdash, there was a yam sha'asa Shlomo, a big container of water, and there were 12 oxen that he made out of metal, and they were holding up that yam, holding up that huge pool of water. These Yud-Beis Bakar, these 12 cattle, so to speak, they correspond to the 12 Shvatim. They are more specific than the source of those behemoths, so to speak, those levels that are compared to animals. And that level is called the Behema Rabbah, which we're going to see is referring to Malchus of Atzilus. Now, the truth is that even those levels of the Yud-Beis Bakar, of the 12 cattle, so to speak, they themselves are general, because as we said, they correspond to the Shvatim. The Shvatim were general neshamas, which have very many branches that come from them, like Shevi Reuven, for example. Within his camp, there are tens of thousands of neshamas. And Reuven was a general neshama that included all of them like branches that come from a tree. The same is true of all the 12 Shvatim. Nevertheless, the source of these 12 is called Behema Rabbah because compared to them, it's an even more general level. Rabbah, the Zohar says, is referring to something great, as in Rabbi's bonis osu choyo. It's not about the quantity, but it's about the quality. So similarly, just like we have Malchus of Atzilus being called the Behema Rabbah, Kabbalistically, sometimes we have Malchus of Ak, of Adam Kadmon, also being called Behema Rabbah. Now, the way it works is that in the level of Malchus of Bria is included the elevations of Kedusha that come up from the world of Bria, from the Noiga of Bria. In the Malchus of Yetzirah is included all of the sparks that come up in the world of Yetzirah, and so on. This is why we say that the Omer is the michla de be'ira. It is the food of the animal. What does it mean? Just like when you eat something, the food gets digested, and whatever cannot be digested is processed outside of the body. And whatever can be goes into the body and becomes the life force of that body. So too, the divine sparks, so to speak, are elevated within the realm of Atzilus. They're elevated to that realm of holiness, of Kedusha of Atzilus. And that's why they are, so to speak, feeding that animal. That means they give energy, that chayas, that energy of those nitzotzos goes into their source, which is the world of Atzilus, through Malchus, which is called the Behema, so to speak. What does it mean exactly that it is Se'oira, that it is the barley specifically? So the concept is that it says in the Zohar that Se'oira is Shiur Hay. Shiur Hay means the measure of 5. 5 is referring to the 5 levels of Gevura that divide the energy that comes down into this world into different levels, so that different levels are created. The camp of Máchal, for example, of Gavriel, and so on and so forth. It is the levels of Gevura that divide the energy as it comes down into this world to give life to every specific item. Just like we have in terms of the voice, that the voice is a simple voice, and then we have 5 different speech organs. We have the mouth, we have the throat, we have the lips, and so on. And besides those general 5 organs, we have very many specific letters that we can divide, letters and words, that we can divide our speech into. So the same is true when Hashem creates the world. The Hey Gevuras, the 5 levels of Gevura, divide the energy that comes into this world and creates different levels. Like it says, Elef Alaf Misham Shuna, there are thousands and tens of thousands of Malochim. These all come from differences in the letters of the Asar Mamoris, Yihi Or, and so on. And those letters can be transformed with other letters, Gematrias, and so on, like we say in Tanya. The source of these 5 levels of Gevura is from the 5 levels of Gevura that are within Bina. Because just like you have differences in speech, you also have differences in thought. And the differences in speech come from the differences in thought. Within thought, it's the letters of the thought. And they are called pituche chosim. They're like engraved letters as opposed to regular letters. And according to the way the thought is differentiated, that's the way the speech is going to be differentiated. So, just like the energy that comes down into this world from Hashem goes through the process of 5 dividing aspects, which is 5 levels of war corresponding to the 5 organs of speech, so too, when the holiness comes up from the lower realms, it is also associated with those 5 levels of war, because the 5 levels of war are what, so to speak, descend into this world, into the world of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, to, so to speak, gather that holiness. That's why it's called Latiten Teref Levesa, that she gives teref, which means food, but it also has the connotation of something that is grabbed and something that is snatched, like an Ari Toref, like a lion that grabs something. And this is accomplished through the levels of Gevura that, so to speak, overpower any negative force to elevate that Kedusha into the higher realms. Spiritually speaking, the concept of the Gevura, which helps us overcome the Yetzer Hara, is, as it says in the Gemara, La'olam yargiz adam Yetzer Tov Yetzer Hara. A person should always fight with his Yetzer Tov over his Yetzer Hara. So that's why the elevation that comes through the bringing up the divine holiness into the realm of Atzilus is associated with Se'ora, with the barley, because it's the sheer hay, it's the 5 levels of Gevura that come from the realm of Atzilus in order to, so to speak, gather up this holiness that is found in the lower realms and bring it back into its source, into the world of Atzilus. So this all explains the concept of the Omer sacrifice, the barley sacrifice. What's the idea of lifting it? Supposed to lift up and wave the Omer. What does that mean exactly? So the Zohar says that it's called Omer HaTnufa, an Omer that is waved in front of Hashem, so to speak. So it says in the Zohar Parshas Balak that Tenufa means Tenu Peh, give it a mouth. The mouth is, of course, referring to Malchus Peh. We say in Pasach Aliyahu, in the Tikkunei Zohar, that Malchus is associated with the Peh, with the mouth. As we said, it's associated with speech. It's also associated with kavod. Tenu kavod. Tenu Peh is similar to Tenu kavod, because that's also another name for the level of Malchus. So to understand what this means, that we're bringing the Omer up to the level of Peh. So we know the difference between Pesach and Shavuos. What happened on Pesach? Pesach, spiritually speaking, was an elevation of the level of Zah, the Ze'er Anpin, right, the 7 attributes of Atzilus, 6 attributes more specifically, Chesed, Gvura, Teres, Nesachot, Yesod, for they were elevated from their state of Katnos, when they were not mature, and they were in a level of Mitzrayim, which is Meitzorim and Gvulim, limitations. they went up to their source. There was the geula of Mitzrayim, the redemption from those limitations, and they got an extra revelation from moichin to gadlus, from high levels of understanding within Hashem. This is all a mashal, so to speak, for the concept of the nefesh elokis that is in a person. The source of the nefesh elokis, the godly soul, is from Zah, from Ze'er Anpin. The pasuk says, Atam, you, the Jewish people, Adam, are called Adam. And Adam is the gematria of 45, the Shem Ma, which is associated with Zah. So this is what happens on Pesach in general. The first day of Pesach, the Jewish neshamas are elevated back to their source, from a state of katnos to a state of moichin de gadlus, a revelation of the level of Hashem's intellect. What happens on the second day of Pesach? The kohen, whose source is from Abba, from Chachma, he waves the Omer. The Omer represents the nefesh of Bahamas, the animal soul of every person, that is elevated and is being transformed to holiness. Just like we said before, the whole concept of the Sa'ira is bringing up the divine sparks back to their source. So here there is divine sparks in the nefesh of Bahamas, in the animal soul, and the waving of the Omer represents bringing them back up to their source. And their source is this very level that we've been discussing till now, Malchus, which is called Bahama. Bahama is the gematria of 52, which is associated with the different name of Hashem, the name of Ban. And this is because the source of the nefesh of Bahamas is from those 12 cattle that we mentioned earlier, whose source in turn is in the level of Malchus. Now, in order for us to get the Torah, we have to have a will, a desire to get the Torah. That desire has to be all-encompassing from all parts of ourselves. And that's why we have to work on our desire to serve Hashem during the days of the sphere, so Omer. Because it's through the fact that we have a desire to serve Hashem that even reaches our animal soul, that we can ultimately have a high-level desire on Shavuos, which encompasses way beyond that. The Alter Rebbe explains there are two levels of rotzon, two levels of will. One is a rotzon ha'alyin, one is rotzon ha'tachten, the higher level will and the lower level will. The higher level will is when a person wants something that is beyond their intellect. They don't fully understand it, they just know that they want it. And then the rotzon ha'tachten, the simple will, is to understand something, to understand how good it is, and therefore to want it. Now, on Shavuos, at the time of the Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, there was a gilei rotzon ha'elya, there was a higher level of will revealed. It was not possible, it was only possible for us to have this revelation by first introducing the rotzon of Hashem through our understanding. When we accomplish the rotzon ha'tachten as best as we can, the lower level will, then the higher level will come to us from Hashem. Like we say in Pirkei Avos, do His will like your will, so that He will do your will like His will. Meaning to say, when you make your lower level will in accordance with Hashem's will, then His higher level will come into your higher level will, and you will desire to serve Hashem in a way that is beyond this world. This is the whole concept of the sphere, so Omer, meaning to say that they would wave the Omer, the barley, on a level that is lifnei havaya, higher than Yudke Vavke, higher than Zah. What is higher than Zah? That's the level of Bina. And then we bring from that level down into this world. That's why it says, you should count for yourselves from Machras HaShabbos. What is Machras HaShabbos? Machras HaShabbos is the level that is higher than Shabbos. It's referring to the level of Makifim of Bina. The level of Makif associated with the aspect of Hashem's Bina. This is called Machras HaShabbos. Why? Friday night is associated with the level of Malchus. The day of Malchus, of Shabbos, excuse me. So Friday night is Malchus. The day of Shabbos is associated with Zoh. Machras HaShabbos, the day after Shabbos, is beyond the regular Shabbos, and that's Bina. Similar to what we say about Be'ever HaNohar, Yoshua V'Seichem Be'olam. That your forefathers were Be'ever HaNohar. Ever HaNohar is higher than Bina. The Nohar is called Bina, and Ever HaNohar, on the other side of that, is Chachma, that's beyond Bina. Similarly, when we say Machras HaShabbos, it's the Bina level of divine understanding, which is higher than Zoh and Nukva, Zoh and Malchus, which are the levels corresponding to the night and the day of Shabbos. Now, the truth is, the Alter Rebbe says that sometimes we find that Bina is called Shabbos, but in truth, it's not really called Shabbos. It's called Shabbos Shabbosan, the higher level Shabbos. It is from this level of Bina that we get the Makif from Malchus. We're going to learn more about Makif in a moment. This is why we say Hayoim, Yoim, such and such Omer. The word Yoim is 56. It's the gematria of Kel Havaya 31 plus 26. The Kel Havaya is 57 and Yom is 56, but sometimes we count the koilol, the word itself, as one, so that's why it comes to 57. In any case, when we say Hayoim, Yom such and such la'omer, we mean we're bringing from the level of Kel Havaya into the level we call Omer. And this is the level of Makif that is coming into the aspect of the Omer, which is the elevation of the lower levels of holiness into the source, as we said. What is the idea of the Makif? So we know that different Mallachim can internalize different levels of revelation. What a high level Malach can integrate, a lower level Malach cannot. Their brain, their level of comprehension, they don't have brains per se, but the level of comprehension is too small than to appreciate the great revelation that the greater Malachim achieve. Now, the greater Malachim that understand that revelation, for them that revelation is pneumius, they grasp it. But something that is beyond the grasp of a particular Malach, that is considered to be or makif, that's beyond their comprehension. So it is said to be, so to speak, a surrounding light. What does this mean in terms of our serving Hashem? There are two levels of Ahava, of love. A person can have one level of love, which is limited. It's inward, but it's limited. So it has an end. A person might love Hashem for 1 hour, maybe for more. But at the end of that time, that love kind of dissipates. Higher level love is when a person thinks about the greatness of Hashem himself. That is not changed by anything in this world. And this will bring a person to love Hashem in a way that is beyond their grasp. And that's why we call it makif. When we say it's makif, we mean that it's protective, just like makif surrounds. What does that mean? From the first level of love, because it could have a hefsek, it could have a interruption. Like we said, it's based on your understanding, and then you think about other things and you forget about that. Not only that, it could have a negative impact because the person has an emotional arousal, and if they're not using it properly, it can lead to negative emotions. And that's why we have to have also a love that is beyond any limitation. And that love to Hashem becomes like the shomer, becomes like the guard, so that there should not be any negative repercussions of the other love which might dissipate. Kabbalistically, this is referred to as the clothing of chashmal, which cloaks the Zah and the Nukva on both sides and does not allow for any any nourishment to the outside forces. So this is the mashal for this is, like we said, the Ava, the Hashem himself, that protects the Ava that we have based on our understanding and protects it from not leading to emotional excitement, which can then be misused. So this is why it's called makif. It's like something that's surrounding and protecting. This is the level of understanding of Hashem that protects on the midos, on the emotions that a person might have towards Hashem. And it ensures that a person does not have any desire for anything else outside of Hashem. And this is accomplished by the hisboinenus, the thinking by the greatness of Hashem, as much as he can comprehend, even though he can't comprehend it fully. And that level of love towards Hashem, without full comprehension, that is what protects a person and does not allow the regular standard level of Hashem to be misused. Now it says in the pasuk that after you wave the Omer, you should count Sheva Shabbosos Temimos Tiyena, 7 full weeks. And what is this referring to? This is referring to the Zion midas, the 7 times 7 midas, the way they are in their source, which is Emor, the level of Bina. We said Memachar Shabbos is that level of Bina. And the counting of the 50 days refers to the perfection of those aspects that we have within our Bina. When we're talking about such a high level, there is no place for the nourishment of unholy forces. That level is called Alma de Cherus, Kabbalistically, the realm of freedom. When we're talking about the lower levels of divine revelation, for example, Zah, so it says that Avraham corresponded to the Chesed of Atzilus, which is one of those spheres. He had Yishmael. That means even though serving Hashem was fantastic, but there were aspects that gave room for the whole concept of Yishmael and that religion and so on. And Yitzchak is the same thing. And therefore, it is through Bina, which is the level of the Sheva Shabbos to the complete weeks. And when we say they're complete, we mean that they do not allow for any nourishment from the evil side. And that's because there is a revelation from Mimachar Shabbos, from the level of Hashem, that is the level of Bina, of great understanding, and that protects that a person should maintain his connection and his cleaving to Hashem, even when the regular level of love dissipates. This is all a preparation for Shavuos, which is when we have a ha'aras ratzon elyon, a higher level of the divine will that is revealed at that time. Pesach, we did not achieve this level because Pesach, we had the aliyah of the Zah, right, then the godly soul, but we did not have the aliyah of the malchus, of the source of the animalistic soul. It is through this Omer that we elevate that animalistic soul, and then we can have a full connection between Zah, the level of the godly soul, and Nukva, malchus, the level of the animal soul, and then we can have the giving of the Torah, which is l'rtzon chem, according to your will, meaning to say that it's a new revelation of Hashem's will as a result of these two levels coming together, the lower and higher level of Ratzon and the level of the Nefesh Elokis, the source of the Nefesh Elokis, together with the source of the Nefesh Bahamas. Okay, now we have to understand what it says in the Zohar, Parshas Balak. It asks why Chita is such an important component of the Karbanos, specifically on Shavuos. When we know that the letters of Ches and Tes do not exist in any of the Shvatim, so apparently there's something wrong with those letters, yet when it comes to Chita, we are supposed to specifically make a korban out of Chita, and it's a completely holy korban. So what's going on? So the Zohar says that Chita is like a daughter who is mischate kame avua, who begs her father for mercy. Now, the fact is that, that's like a play on the words, because chita and mischate, the wheat and the begging, is a similar word. But Lamaisa, how do we answer that problem that the Shvatim do not have the ches in the test, and here we're saying it's a holy korban? So the concept is that the sa'oira that we spoke about before is the shir hay. It's the animal food, so to speak, the feeding of the level of malchus, of atzilus, which is compared in some ways to behema. It's called the behema rabba. Chita, on the other hand, is food used for people. And that's why the Shvatim do not have the ches in the test. Because Chita is still associated with Malchus. And the Shvatim okay, so let's just backtrack a little bit. Chita is associated with man. It's Máchal Adam. It is the bread of man, it's food of man, and therefore one would think that it's associated with Zah, which we said is the source of the Jewish neshama. On the other hand, based on the Zohar, it seems that Chita is associated with the level of Malchus, and there is some negativity there, some room for sinfulness, which is why it is two of the three letters of Chet, of sin, which is why the Shvatim do not have that in their name at all. So how do we reconcile that with what we said before, that it's Máchal Adam, which Adam is on a higher level than the level of Malchus, which is what is compared to a behema? So the truth is that we have many sources where Malchus is considered the source of the Jewish neshamas. Even though we spoke earlier that Zah is the source of the Jewish neshamas, we have other sources that talk about Malchus as being that source. So the concept is that Malchus receives revelations of the 5 levels of Chesed and the 5 levels of Gvura. 5 levels of Chesed bring Chochmah into Malchus, and the 5 levels of Gvura bring Bina into Malchus. And these correspond to the Pnimius of Malchus and the Chetzonius of Malchus. The Pnimius of Malchus is associated with the 5 levels of Chesed. That is where the Jewish neshamas come from. They receive from the level, the internal aspect of Malchus. It means in terms of our avodas Hashem. This is all very Kabbalistic, with the 5 levels of Chesed being the source of the inner aspect of Malchus, the 5 levels of Gvura being the source of the outer aspect of Malchus. The inner aspect is associated with Chita. The outer aspect is associated with Sa'oira. The inner aspect is associated with the level of Malchus, the way it is part of Atzilus. And the external aspect of Malchus is the way Malchus is the source of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, which is why it's associated with the behema, the aspect that receives the holiness from the lower levels. What does it mean in terms of avodas Hashem? So we know that it says that a tinuk, a child, does not know his father until he tastes grain. That means that the understanding reaches the child specifically when they eat grain. At the same time, even though the child understands and knows who the father is, nevertheless, that understanding is not an intellectual understanding. It is simply an awareness that is higher than intellect, that comes into their intellect. So when we speak about the 5 levels of Chesed, of Abba, coming into the Jewish neshamas, what we mean is a level of connection to Hashem that is so deep that it's beyond understanding. It's a level of the bittul of the nefesh, the total self-nullification of the neshama in a way that's beyond understanding to Hashem. This is why we say that Abba Yosad Barta, the father, which is this level of Chachma, which represents complete humility, is the source of Barta of the daughter, which is Malchus, as we've been explaining. But to go back to the Zohar, why is it that the Shvatim do not have the Ches and the Tes, even though Chita does? Because the letters Ches and Tes essentially are from Gevura, and the Shvatim are on a higher level, and therefore they don't have the Ches and the Tes. But after we add the Hey into the Ches and the Tes, and it becomes Chita, and the Hey represents the 5 levels of Chesed, that sweetens, so to speak, the Ches and the Tes, and turns them into aspects of Kedusha. Now, that which says in the Zohar that the Chita is associated with a daughter who is Meschate, who is begging in front of her father, and her father does her will. So this is the idea of Chesed. When the father does her will, it means that he is doing Chesed. So the Chita is associated with Chesed. As we said, we also see that the word Chet, which is sin, can also mean lacking. Like it says, Ani ubni shlema chatoim, that will be found lacking. And we have another pasuk that says, Chata'echa b'tzedakah proik, your chet, your lack, is redeemed through tzedakah, which is chesed. So the ches and the tes, the aspect that is lacking, is fixed through tzedakah, which is chesed. So now we understand that the Chita represents the inner aspect of Malchus, which is sweetened through the 5 aspects of Gevura, of Chesed, excuse me. This is why Adam Arishan, whose neshama was from the tree of life, Ilana Dechaya, he was from the aspect of Zoh, which is the tree of life. So for him to eat from the Chita, we know, the Gemara says one of the opinions is that Eitz Hadas was a Chita, was an actual wheat stalk. Now the wheat stalk is Malchus, it's the pnimius of Malchus, but nevertheless it is Malchus. And therefore it was a level that is below Adam Harishon. And for him to eat from it represented an improper descent from his essential level that was completely higher than that level. This is all to explain the Chita. The Sha'oir, on the other hand, the barley is associated with the external aspect of Malchus, which is level of Hashem that gives life to all of the lower worlds. And that is accomplished through the 5 aspects of Gevura, which are associated with Bina, which is like a person speaks through the 5 organs of speech. The speech itself is simple, but in order for it to reach this world, it has to be contracted and divided in all of these different ways. And the source, original source that divides them is the machshava. And that's the level of Bina. And that's why it is the 5 levels of Bina which divide the energy, so to speak, that comes into this world through Malchus. And that is the external aspect of Malchus, which relates to this world. This then is the source of the Nefesh Bahamis, which comes from the 12 Bakar that we described, which is in the realm of Bria. Nefesh Kis, on the other hand, its source is from the internal aspect of Malchus, which is really connected to Zah, a level higher than it. This is why we find that sometimes Malchus is called Behema and sometimes it's called Adam. When Malchus is in Atzilus, it's called Adam. When it is descending into Bria in order to elevate the divine sparks that are found there, like we discussed, then it is called Behema. Like the pasuk says, Ruach HaBehema Hayeredes Lamada. It's the spirit of the Behema that goes down. These are the 2 aspects of the internal and external aspect of Malchus. Now, the counting of the Omer, like we said, is the elevation of the animal soul, fixing it so it goes back up into its source. And then on Shavuos, we have the aspect of Adam and Behema, both going back to their source within Atzilus. That's why we bring a mincha chadasha, a new type of carbon, which is a wheat carbon, because we've already fixed the level of the animal and we're up to the level of the man. And this then brings about a new revelation on Matan Torah from the level of Keser and Chachma. And that is the reason that this is unique is because it's coming about as a result of the connection between the Chita and the So'ira. The connection between the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Bahamis, the animal soul and the godly soul, when the animal soul is elevated to its source. And this is like the connection of the Eitz Hadas and the Eitz Chaim to become completely one. So now we understand the concept of Pesach. The first day is the elevation of Nefesh Elokis in a small way. And then on the second day, we elevate the Nefesh Bahamis, and we work on that elevation, bringing it into Sheva Shabbos Tmimas, 7 weeks that are complete, meaning to say, bringing in the level of Bina, of the source of the Nefesh Bahamis, bringing that into the awareness of the Nefesh Bahamis itself. When we completely elevate that level, then it is united with its source. And on Shavuos, we have the connection of the Nefesh Bahamis and the Nefesh Elokis both elevated to their source, bringing about a new revelation that is beyond both of them. And this is the concept of the Ratzon Elyon that comes through the Ratzon Tachton. We serve Hashem during the time of the Omer to bring our will to serve Hashem on our own, best we can. And then from above, on Shavuos, we get a Ratzon Elyon, a desire from above to serve Hashem, like it says that Hashem put the mountain over the Jewish people, forcing them to serve him. What does it mean, forcing them? That means it was a level that was completely beyond them, like makif, that you cannot completely integrate, but you cannot get away from it either. It's completely surrounding you. And that feeling of complete devotion to Hashem comes after we bring our lower level will towards Hashem, both in our godly aspects and in our animalistic aspects. So that is the first mimer of the Hanif in the Likkutei Torah.